Hello, everyone, and welcome to West of Centre. I'm Kathleen Petty. It's Wednesday, April 16th. I assume you all know that because you got here. So you must have known what the day was and the time to come. And we're live from the beautiful Esplanade Arts and Heritage Centre in Medicine Hat. What a beautiful facility. You're so lucky to have this facility. I got a tour earlier and I was just so impressed. It's just a gorgeous venue. And we really have a terrific show for you. We've got a wonderful panel from across the political spectrum, because it is a political podcast after all, to tackle everything from energy policy to economic resilience, that you know all about, to Western alienation. And of course, this is all smack dab in the middle of a federal election campaign. And after we talk to our panel, we will go to the floor and be talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to that. And one other thing that some of you might not be aware of, I would be happy to be in Medicine Hat for any reason, but I'm especially happy to be here because it's a wee bit of a homecoming for me. I started my career in Medicine Hat at Chat TV. 1986. So you can do the math. I've been around a while. That's why I made the crack about getting down slowly and getting up slowly when my pen dropped. So I hosted a talk show called Dialogue. If there's anyone in the audience who's old enough to remember that, or am I the oldest one here? I anchored the 6 o'clock news as well, co-anchored the 6 o'clock news. But my pride and joy was, does anyone remember Ruby Juss? Oh, hi. Okay, awesome. So Ruby wrote a book called Just Microwaving. And she was on the talk show that I hosted, Dialogue, and I thought, you know what? Now remember, this is 1986. Microwaves were new. Microwaves were big. Microwaves were expensive. And we were still putting foil in them. So we need a cookbook to tell us not to do that. And I thought, you know what, we should create a cooking show using only microwaves. And so we did. And we called it Just Microwaving. And so in many ways, that was a highlight. And one other one I'll share with you from my time in Medicine Hat. I believe that the talk show I hosted was the first television appearance by someone you may know. Her name is Terry Clark. Yeah. And I'll share one other anecdote. Do not come to me for career advice, because after her performance, she came to me and said, you know, I'm trying to decide whether I should just quit high school and move to Nashville and make a go of it. And of course, I advised her, you got it. I advised her to finish high school. I don't think she did. I think she went to Nashville. And of course, now she's a member of the Grand Ole Opry. Anyway, I have many, many fond memories of Medicine Hat, so I'm very, very excited that we can come back. And I know Tracy was mentioning that the National was here not too long ago. I thought, some great storytelling out of Medicine Hat. I thought it was such good programming, from energy to drones to greenhouses to craft beer, of course, the politics and priorities of this city. And often, you're left out of the big conversations. Well, we want to invite you into the conversation. And what we're really here to do is to listen and to learn. And to learn from you and reflect who you are, who and what you are. So the rest of the country gets to know you, because you're worth knowing. So before we get to our panel, I want to invite out the first guest. And I'm hoping that you know her, because she sure is busy. She's in charge of just about everything, it feels like. Rochelle Pancoast is the City of Medicine Hat's Managing Director of Energy, Land, and Environment.
Hello, Kathleen.
Hey, Rochelle. That is a lot. Is there anything you're not in charge of?
Oh, plenty. There's lots that we cover at the city as a very diversified organization.
So tell the rest of the country, everyone in this room knows, and people in Medicine Hat know, but tell me and the rest of Canada what is so special about Medicine Hat.
Oh, there's plenty special about Medicine Hat, but we're probably most known as the gas city. We were essentially founded on top of one of the largest natural gas reserves in North America, and we discovered that back in the day, essentially by trying to drill water wells and discovered gas. And it was actually a safety issue in many ways. And at one point, locals here know that Mr. Kipling had said that we had all hell for a basement because it was a problem and a challenge. Not long after that, a few years later, he came back and he said we were one of the luckiest cities. And essentially, I credit a lot of that to our pioneers. The city itself became a city, and they decided to harness that opportunity. They created their own municipally owned utility as a gas service to the city, and shortly thereafter created its own electric generation and a municipally owned utility on electric services as well. So it created a big boom for the city, and we've done well with that ever since.
And does the boom continue, or is there a transition happening?
There is definitely a transition. So it's been well over a century, and we've largely depleted our economic gas reserves locally to the tune of we only use about 10 to 15% of the natural gas that self-supplied, and the rest we do get from the rest of the provincial market, the provincial network. And in the meantime, our electricity generation has helped fill some of that financial gap. Because on the gas side, we're actually now at that point where end of life we're having to abandon, and that's a significant liability for us. So what had been quite abundant, quite plentiful and helpful for our local financials has turned to a bit of a liability on the natural gas side. Electric has certainly helped to fill the gap, but we're facing some transition there based on global energy transition and determining how best to move forward, because our current electric generation fleet is 100% natural gas based.
And so how much of a debate is that in the community?
It's quite a debate. This community often sees it, anything to do with green energy is often seen as an enemy to natural gas. Natural gas has served us really well, and there's almost a longing to keep that going. So it's often seen as the enemy. And I think some pockets are saying it's about time that we catch up with where the province is at. Certainly the province has grown significant renewables in recent years. The rest of the country is largely hydro, so the rest of the country is already clean. And natural gas is seen as that next target now that coal has been shut down as coal-fired electric generation in the province. We now have the dirtiest emitting fuel from a greenhouse gas perspective, and we need to be thoughtful about what that means going forward. And certainly federal regulations, provincial regulations, challenges what that could look like. So we're trying to be thoughtful about how to proceed, and we're currently contemplating the addition of a solar field locally.
So let's talk about that, because this is a really sunny city.
We are the sunniest city of Canada,
Right?
I'm very proud to say.
I mean, Calgary likes to pretend that we are, but I think you're sunnier.
Sunniest city in Canada. So there is certainly opportunity on the solar side. Solar is not perfect. We all know that. It only generates electricity when the sun is shining. Could we and would we love to stay with our gas-fired electric generation? Absolutely. It's served us really well. It's highly reliable. It runs 24/7. And we're trying to figure out how can we respond going forward in the midst of potential carbon decarbonization requirements, pardon me. And that's a challenge. So we're contemplating adding to our portfolio, not replacing our natural gas, but complementing it with some solar energy.
Well, you need storage, right?
Storage, certainly. We do have the ability to leverage how we run our existing gas-fired electric generation units to accommodate and back off if needed, increase if needed. We also do have an interconnection into the rest of the province. We're actually our own microgrid where we self-supply internally, but we do have our own, what we call an intertie into the provincial grid that also acts as a bit of a relief valve to export when we're in a surplus situation or import if we're short.
How important then is the conversation during this federal election campaign around energy policy? Like, tell me the extent to which you're paying sort of close attention and where that conversation really matters to a place like the Hat.
Absolutely. And in that regard, we're very much, particularly the city from the electricity side in particular, very much like the rest of the province. The province is highly focused on natural gas-fired electric generation, certainly benefiting from natural gas reserves across the province. And where we go on energy policy matters to all of us. Certainly the political spectrum has almost widened during this election, with Poilievre talking about removing the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act and leaving it to the province to determine how we move forward with carbon, and Carney is looking at potentially tightening the regulations for
the
industrial
price
level
you're talking
on
about.
carbon. So at the industrial level, the uncertainty is actually increased in the short term. But what I really love is there's a greater conversation in response to what's happening south of the border, of really driving an improved effort to remove trade barriers internally in between provinces, and
Yeah.
and to really recognize that we have an opportunity to increase our energy security across the country and really drive reduced barriers to that, including simplifying the regulations to grow and develop and to expand that economic corridor.
Can I just say, I never thought I would live to see the day that an audience would clap about the issue of interprovincial trade barriers, but here we are in 2025. Who knew? Who knew? Let's talk about that fella down south. How much uncertainty is that? I'm hearing the murmuring, and did I hear booing? I might have heard booing. Okay, all right. How much of a challenge is this uncertainty over tariffs in a place like this?
I think the whole nation is feeling it, and certainly from a business perspective, at least from our energy business perspective, there's tremendous uncertainty. It's hard to predict what is the motivation. Is this going to last? Is it short term? Is it a negotiating position? It's really created investment uncertainty and lack of confidence. But what it really also has done is it's really pushed on that complacency issue and made sure that we're recognizing the risk paradigm has shifted, and that we really do need to revisit how much of our eggs were in that basket, with a desire to look at both the vendor and the customer side of our supply chains and make sure that we're diversified and leveraging where we can.
How would you describe the vulnerability of this part of the province to changing climate?
It's a good question. We are in a semi-arid desert in Medicine Hat, so we are on a multi-year drought at this point. It is often a challenge, but that's something we've been used to. We have also faced floods along the way. As the city has supported the installation of physical berms to try to protect against future floods. We've also engaged in water management strategies led by the province. We've did that last year through a provincial water management sharing agreement. And through that process, we did ask our residents to have some voluntary water conservation. And we did reduce our our water consumption year over year by 15%. And we've also recently changed how we price our water utility locally in an effort to try to drive water conservation going forward. So we're mindful that
When you say you changed how you priced it, does that mean the price went up?
No, we reallocated our rate classes to put greater focus on the consumption level of water. So those who consume more will pay more, and those who consume less will pay less.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just finally, since we are in the political season, if the next Prime Minister was sitting beside you and you were the one asking the questions, what would the question be?
I think it would be difficult for a question, but I definitely have some thoughts. I had the opportunity recently to watch a fireside chat between two former prime ministers at an event I was at. And something they said really resonated with me. It was Prime Minister Harper and Prime Minister Chrétien.
Okay.
So opposite political spectrums, but they agreed on more than that then they disagreed, which was really fabulous to see. And they both agreed not to waste a good crisis. It feels like we're in a crisis with what's happening and the surprises and the uncertainty south of the border. But the opportunity is all of those things. Reduce the interprovincial barriers, make sure that we can drive improved energy security from a national perspective, look at the opportunities to reduce the red tape and make it easier to develop the resources that we have for the benefit of our country. Make sure that we recognize that what had been seen perhaps as a challenge or an issue in owning and having lots of natural gas or other energy opportunities, see that as a regional strength, align that with other regional strengths, and look for opportunities to unite us as a country instead of the regional divide that has been occurring through time. But they also commented had commented that we are one of the strongest economies in the world, and we don't behave like that. So there's a real opportunity to reduce the barriers that we're facing internally, that we've put upon ourselves, and to unleash and empower the economic capability that we have.
Have some collective swagger.
You bet.
Yeah. Rochelle, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
That was terrific. Give her a big hand. That's Rochelle Pancoast, Managing Director of Energy, Land and Environment. And now it's time to bring in our panel, so let me introduce them. I see them way off in the distance, and they're about to make their way. Michaela Fry is the former UCP MLA for Brooks and Medicine Hat. Michaela? Here she comes. You can have a seat there. Barry Morishita, the former Mayor of Brooks and former leader of the Alberta Party. Barry, come on in. Is Barry lost?
He's getting his mic on, I think.
Is he? Okay, Barry's running a little late. So, given that, I'm just going to ask Janet to come out. Because you want to clap for someone else. This is Janet Brown. The one and only Janet Brown. The Oracle of Alberta, as I believe your moniker is these days, the go-to pollster in Alberta, if you want to know what's actually going to happen. Her polling is the polling that you should be paying attention to. Here comes Barry Morishita. Come on down. You're the next contestant on West of Centre. And have a seat. It's great to see all of you. Thanks for coming. So first of all, you heard Rochelle. I'm curious about just your general take on what she shared with us over the last 10 minutes. Michaela?
I think what Rochelle portrayed is really what we're hearing in the business community as well. You know, uncertainty is a real factor for a lot of businesses, especially Medicine Hat, and with volatile statements from different leaders on carbon pricing. Is it going to be there? Is it not? What's going to happen today? What's going to happen tomorrow? I think that uncertainty leads to real business risk. And so I think it's incumbent upon the leaders to be having real politics and full sentence conversations and making sure that the electorate knows what they're about to do.
Yeah, Barry?
I agree. I think there's been a lack of certainty for a long time. I think it's stretched way back, at the beginning of the election campaign in the U.S., which never seems to end, particularly with Donald Trump in play, and it's continued on. I think what the opportunity has been is that, Canada's kind of been riding on coattails for 50 years, to be honest with you. We've had it easy. I know when I think about my age,
Yep.
I haven't had to worry about a whole lot. And we've kind of watched these debates go by, and we haven't really acted on our opportunities. So it was really great to hear Rochelle say that there is a belief in this room, a belief in this city, and a belief in this province and this country that we can do so much better. And I think this is a real opportunity for Canada to step up.
Well, you're as much an analyst as you are a pollster, Janet. Is that sort of your sense? I mean, is there a moment that we're all in a position to try and meet right now?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm the outsider here. Michaela and Barry are both local. And, I was really just, as I prepared for today, as I listened to Rochelle, it's like there's such a complex economy here in Medicine Hat. And I don't think people outside of Medicine Hat, really just sort of get all the different things that are going on here and how the economy is changing so quickly. So, but I think that dynamism kind of makes Medicine Hat this little microcosm of all the stuff that's going on in Alberta and all the stuff that's going on in Canada. I mean, there's just our concerns right now are so complex, right? Everybody's trying to just deduce it down to who do you think is better to handle Trump, right? But the Trump situation is just layered on concerns about affordability, concerns about economic diversification, interprovincial trade barriers. I heard that round of applause before. So it seems to be an election about Trump, but it's layered onto some very complicated economic stuff.
One of the things that I think perplexes us, and we were wondering about, and one of the reasons why we wanted to come here, is, as you point out, this is a microcosm of what's happening in all parts of this country in Medicine Hat. And it just seems to me there are obvious lessons then to learn from a city like this. And yet, Michaela, I'm sure you would be the first to acknowledge it's hard to break through into the conversation, right?
Yeah, I mean, Medicine Hat, everybody in this audience knows we've developed this moniker as being the forgotten corner, and it's so unfortunate because, if you just watch the 15-minute, piece from the National, we have so much to offer here. And I've always said that Medicine Hat has such a good story to tell. We're resilient, we've overcome floods, we've overcome drought, we've overcome just about everything here. And I think that we have real lessons to teach the rest of the country. Yeah. And unfortunately, some of that is proximity. We're, over 500 kilometers away from Edmonton. I know that very well, driving back and forth. And we're very far away from Ottawa. So I think getting our voice there logistically is hard. We do have to lean on local representation. And at the end of the day, it's great to see CBC coming here, giving more of a voice to Medicine Hat, and also I think, just our businesses really have good stories to tell as well. So hopefully that leads to more excitement about Medicine Hat and more interest in Medicine Hat. I
hope we can contribute to that. We really, truly want to. It's one of the reasons why we want to open up a bureau here. But Barry, just sort of pick up on what Michaela was saying about paying attention to, and I want to talk about the polling too, Janet, but paying attention to smaller cities because you sort of get drowned out, presumably. I'm sure that's how you feel by both Calgary. I see a lot of nodding by Calgary and Edmonton, right? And it's like, well, what about us?
Well, it's been an ongoing problem, particularly among a lot of mid-cities, actually, in Alberta, where they're kind of the big player in their area, but they don't get a lot of play provincially. And I think it speaks to two problems with our system, generally speaking, both the federal and the provincial system. Everything happens here. Everything gets delivered in Medicine Hat. You can't not get anything here. But yet so many times, and Trump kind of just elevated to a point where you can't ignore it, you feel like you don't have control of your destiny because you're waiting for someone else to make a rule or make a decision or pass on something. And I think a lesson to be learned here is that we have to be a little bit more collaborative. There has to be places like Medicine Hat in the rooms where the decisions are made. And our system doesn't support that right now.
Except that your MLA is the premier of the province.
Yes, fair enough.
I don't know. I got to think that's got to help at least a little.
Barry's well
right?
aware.
I heard that she had won here. But the thing is that she has a job to do as the provincial leader.
Right.
And I think that in some ways that's detrimental, to be quite honest. I think it's tougher when you have to be the premier and also be an MLA. That being said, though, it does not change the argument that places like Medicine Hat, southern Alberta, need to be part of the actual conversation. They need to be heard. The power structures, both provincially and federally, don't allow that. And maybe Michaela can speak to it being an MLA, but I see decision-making happening for sometimes the wrong, good motivation, but they end up happen for the wrong reasons. And part of that is because they've ignored or not listened to places like this about what the cause and effect, what the effect of those decisions are made. I think their system's not working now.
Before I go to Janet, did you want to jump in, Michaela?
If you don't mind, yeah. I saw it at the caucus table. There's 20 some odd MLAs from Calgary, and then there's little old me in the corner of Medicine Hat, right? There's 2 MLAs from Medicine Hat versus 20 some MLAs from Calgary and surrounding area, and a couple from Edmonton. So really, it's all on you as a local representative, and it's really on you and that other person to make sure that you're getting your city's your voice across. And not to mention, like, if you think Medicine Hat feels left out, how does Brooks feel? How do these even smaller cities feel like that? And I feel like that's where you get a lot of the disenfranchisement from the average voter, where you get a lot of people feeling more frustrated and voicing those frustrations more loudly because they feel disconnected, they feel unheard. And I think that's the real root of a lot of the polarization that we see, is that it's chronically been ignored. Their issues have chronically been ignored. A great example in Medicine Hat was actually Halo Air Ambulance. We have a world-class, I'm on the board, so I'm a little biased, but a world-class service here in Medicine Hat. It was started here, local solution to a local problem. They fought forever to get funded by the provincial government, and it wasn't until I think 2021 where we finally secured that funding. And it was like pushing a boulder up a hill for so long. So I think, there are lessons to be learned, like I said, from places like Medicine Hat, and speaking to Barry's point, structure doesn't really help with that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being heard, that's what you're in the business of doing.
Yeah, and here's the sad math of it all. When I do a poll of Alberta, I'll typically talk to 900 people. If the client wants to spend few extra bucks, we do 1,200 people. And so what that means is, let's say it's a sample of 1,200. Let's say it's a big one, right? That means we do 400 interviews in Edmonton, 400 interviews in Calgary, and then the 400 remaining interviews are distributed around the province. And then when I'm talking to people about the data, they'll say, well, there's Calgary, Edmonton, and rural. And I always have to remind them, no, it's Calgary, Edmonton, and other. And rural's part of that, and small towns are part of that, and the mid-sized cities as well. And so, it always breaks my heart when I'm in a presentation and somebody says, can you tell me what's happening in Medicine Hat or Lethbridge? And I'm like, well, boy, it's even hard for me to lump the mid-sized cities together. So, yeah, it's just the sad math of it is, like, Calgary and Edmonton are such a source of gravity that we all just kind of forget that there's life outside of those 2 cities.
Yeah. And here we are in the middle of a campaign trying to understand kind of what is motivating everyone. And one thing I would love to know about Medicine Hat, we talk about how polarized politics is right now. I'll just sort of turn to the audience first. You can sort of clap or make noises, whatever you want to do. But does politics feel polarized to you in your community? Yeah? And do you notice that, Michaela?
Oh, yeah. I was an elected politician during COVID. I heard literally everything.
Yeah.
And the good and the bad and the ugly and everything in between. And I think that those kind of events really blew the lid off of that as well. Issues that you would normally agree to disagree with your neighbor on have become things that you won't talk to your neighbor about anymore. Or you used to be able to sit down and have, you used to be able to have a conservative prime minister and a liberal commentator on the same podcast, and they used to be able to talk and be friends. And you don't see that anymore. And I think that's really sad, and it really
I think we're kind of seeing
erodes
it
our
here.
discourse. Here, exactly.
I think we're seeing it here, at least.
This is the place where you see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things is our politicians and being a recovering one, and our leadership in those groups have they've betrayed us, quite honestly. The fact is that their job is to represent the best interests of, whether they're the leader of the country, the leader of the province, or the leader of the city. They're supposed to represent the best interest and broker their best interests for us. Far too many decisions, and we could go through a litany of them, that end up being made for a political reason rather than a practical reason.
I see Janet nodding.
And they forget the people they hurt. One of the things I prided myself when I was mayor of Brooks is that we didn't do, not everything I did was popular. I have the same guest list on my social media at the time as many of you did, but I always asked who got hurt by this. Like, who could potentially be hurt by this? You're motivated by the right thing. But I think far too many of our leaders currently in places that affect us greatly make political decisions That becomes the overwhelming reason for making a decision, and I think we get hurt by that. And again, the structure doesn't support the other conversation, and that's too bad, because we have really smart people in this world. Like the few hundred of us here, we could solve all the problems in Canada if we just let our guards down. Honestly, we could.
But yeah, I mean, look at the two of you just as an example, right? You stepped aside so Daniel Smith could run.
Yeah, she wasn't popular with me at that point.
You ran against Daniel Smith and lost.
Yeah, I did.
The two of you worked together.
Yeah, I mean, Barry and I worked together before that because Barry was Mayor of Brooks and I was the MLA, so we often had interaction, and now we work together at Alberta Council, which is also really exciting. But I mean, to Barry's point on leadership, I think, sometimes political decisions have to be made, so I don't think we can totally devalue the importance of that. And people do vote for a party in Canada. They vote, they vote for that party to represent them, and that's how they make that decision. That's the lens with which they view it. So I don't think we can completely write that off. I think in an idealistic world, everything would be happy and sunshiny, but sometimes hard decisions have to be made. So, but yeah, Barry and I have been able to disagree, I think, politely, and now we work together, so it's kind of great.
What's your sense, Janet, of the level of polarization? I mean, is it different? Like, has it changed?
So I look at my own polling, and it's like, absolutely, our politics have become polarized. We've turned into a two-party state provincially. It looks like it's a two-party election, at least outside of Quebec, federally. So yes, our politics has become very polarized. But then when I just survey people, Alberta actually sort of comes across as a pretty centrist place when you survey them. So I mean, one thing we'd like to ask in our polling is we say to people, put yourself on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 means you're left wing and 10 means you're right wing. And 5 is always the most common answer. Yeah. And then people, a few more people put themselves on the right side of the spectrum than the left side. But whenever I collect that kind of data, I always go, oh, Alberta's a centrist province that leans a little bit to the right. But our politics leans much further to the right than I think, I'm going to use the word gravity again, than the center of gravity of our population.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've told this story before, but it just has such a profound impact on me, and I remember it to this day. I interviewed Peter Lougheed on the 30th anniversary of PC rule in Alberta, and part of the interview was about why. For 30 years and counting, and we know it went on, was it 42, I think, was the final number? And I said, well, why? and he made the argument that because he felt the Progressive Conservative Party understood where the province was, and the province was in the center. And that it sometimes deviates a little bit left, a little bit right, but it's largely the center, and his party sort of understood where they were, and if there was a bit of movement, he moved with the population, right? And I think people outside of Alberta are surprised when Janet, because her polling shows that definitively, shows that we are largely actually pretty centrist in this province. But it doesn't feel that way sometimes, Michaela, does it?
No, I would say it doesn't feel that way because oftentimes, and I think probably everyone sitting on this panel and everyone in this room can attest to this, but the loudest voices are usually the ones that get heard, and the loudest voices aren't always the most rational. And I think the problem becomes when political parties or leaders start catering to the loudest voices rather than the loudest amount of people, or sorry, the most amount of people making those voices. So I'm obviously partisan. I ran for a political party. I was a UCP MLA. I don't think I'm surprising anyone here when I say that I lean conservative, but I have friends from all over the political spectrum. I personally think that good policy is made when people don't agree and they can sit down and hash it out. So at the end of the day, you have to choose a policy that works best, not necessarily, you can't be overly ideological. And I think that's sometimes where we get caught up, and that's where that polarization really stems from.
Well, the other thing I wonder about when we talk about polarization is, I don't know how many stories I've done about Western alienation in my 40 years of journalism and broadcasting, but, it never ends. And we've been talking about it again. I mean, we know that's been part of the political conversation. over the last couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but certainly it has heated up in recent weeks. And we know the different, parties that have come up from Alberta, whether it's the Maverick Party or Wexit or, one of your former MPs, LeVar Payne, is calling for a provincial independence referendum. Okay. Obviously, you're not voting yes if it ever comes around. I think we can safely say, or at least most of you aren't. But the conversation keeps coming up. And we asked you to do some polling, not specifically, more precisely connected to Donald Trump and the 51st state.
Yeah, so we asked two very simple questions to Albertans. So just Albertans, not all Canadians. But, we just asked them, would you support or oppose, and the way we worded the question, this is important, would you support or oppose the Canadian government entering into negotiations with the U.S. to become the 51st state? Okay? So it wasn't, should we join or shouldn't we join? It was just like, should we enter into negotiations? Should we go for coffee? Right? So
should we
should we go for coffee?
Should we have a date?
So this is a pretty gentle question, but when we asked the question in this gentle way, only 13% of people said, yes, let's go for coffee, right? Only 13% of people support the idea of Canada entering into negotiations, entering into talks. 85% oppose. So we talk about how polarized we are, but the funny thing coming out of this election is we're having a debate about who's best to deal with Trump, but there's a lot of consensus around Trump is the problem, and we're not going to, and we don't want to be part of the United States. So that was the first question. Should Canada enter into negotiations to become a 51st state? And then the follow-up question was, well, what about Alberta? Should Alberta enter into negotiations? And that was 17%. So a little bit higher, 80% of people oppose that, right? So, yeah.
But notwithstanding that result, here we are talking about Western alienation. Mm-hmm. Here we are talking about what happens if the Liberals win a fourth mandate and what that will mean. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah. If the Liberals win a fourth mandate.
And how that will, we've had, when I say we, like the provincial government, Alberta's had a difficult relationship, I think is fair to say, with the federal Liberal government in Ottawa. And one expects we'll have more of the same if it turns out to be a fourth mandate Liberal government. What do you think when you hear people talk about Western alienation and then take it to the next step, Michaela, and say that, separatism, independence at least needs to be something considered?
Well, I'll start by saying this. My great-grandfather fought in the Second World War for Canada. I am Canadian, and I will always be Canadian. And more to the point of that, I like visiting the U.S. like anyone else. You can go to Target, you can see the sights, you can get some sun, whatever. But I love coming home, right? And I'm proud to be Canadian. I'm proud to wear that maple leaf on my backpack when I travel. And I think at the end of the day, like Janet's polling shows it, that is the general consensus of Canadians. The 13%, the 17%, that's an outlier. And I think we've got to be careful not to let that 13 or 17% speak for our populace. But at the end of the day, this sentiment, whether it's separation or not, or alienation or not, I think there's a little bit of it in all of us in the alienation sentiment, where we don't feel like our concerns are being heard in Ottawa or being heard by the governing party at the time. And I think a lot of that has to do with conversations around natural resource development and so forth. So I think it's probably the next question, I don't know, but I think if the Prime Minister, incoming Prime Minister, wanted to repair that relationship, there's definitely a lot of work to do and a lot of room to grow, because I do think we're really at the bottom of that relationship right now. And I am concerned about the sentiment. I'm concerned about the polarization. But the good news is I think it can get better should the Prime Minister choose to want to unify Canadians rather than divide them.
Okay, no matter who is Prime Minister?
I would say that, like I said, I'm partisan, but Mark Carney is certainly not off to a good start on this front. I mean, if I were running to be Prime Minister and wanting to do better than the last guy, I probably wouldn't get up at my rally and openly dismiss the elected Premier of the province. I think, you know, whether you like her or not, whether you like her or not, she is the elected Premier.
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't believe that really sows unity, sows seeds of unity when you are doing that. I also think that coming out of the gate and saying, I will not cancel Bill C-69, which is a major point of contention for not only Saskatchewan, or not only Alberta, but Saskatchewan, I just don't think that's very helpful either. So I think there's a lot that Mark Carney can do to repair the relationship, but it needs to be earnest.
Barry?
Well, I don't want to play to the crowd, a part of the crowd that wasn't very happy about what you said, but I will say this. I think, you know, my opinion, which is great because I get to have one all the time now, the Premier was irresponsible in the demand letter she sent to the Prime Minister because relationships.
Okay, just so I can hear you. I'm not. You clapped. I've got no issue with that. I just want to be able to hear you.
Relationships are two ways. You know, and I'll play a little bit of the devil's advocate, but also my own belief. But a little bit of the devil's advocate is that, you know, the province of Alberta and its leadership has benefited greatly from beating on Ottawa. Like they have. It's been a great way
Can I say it has ever been thus?
Yeah,
like,
as long as I've known.
There's nothing new here.
It's been a great way to kind of, you know, kind of push things and you know, show that you're standing up for Alberta, which is great. You know, politics, like Michaela said, that's part of the game that's played. But if you want to change a relationship, then you have to be like at least civil. And I don't give Mr. Carney's kind of mocking remarks any credibility either. I don't think that was very prime ministerial. But at the same time, I want to be fair and say to demand of a person who's going through election campaign that if you don't do this, separatist sentiment's going to rise. We're going to have a national unity crisis created by what I'm saying today. And then you know, and I just see it as...
But don't Albertans hear that as her saying, we're talking about Medicine Hat needing to be heard?
Well,
is that not just Alberta? Is that not the Premier just saying that we need to be heard? And we need evidence that we've been heard?
I don't disagree that that's the part of the truth. Absolutely. We have talked about it. And the structure doesn't support enough of those good conversations. That being said, you know, when I picture the 10 or 12 premiers of the provinces and the territories sitting around, and they've just talked about how they're going to approach this crisis or this tariff crisis or the Donald Trump crisis, whatever you want to call it, with a certain unity and a certain message, and then go to say that if I don't get everything I want, that we're going to create another crisis out of it, I think is a disingenuous thing to the whole process, like the process of collaborating. I don't disregard. As mayor, when I was the president of the Alberta municipalities, I testified in front of the Senate about the problems with C-69 and other issues. And again, I think political decisions were made that don't support the country's best interest. That being said, though, if we do want a better relationship, we certainly have to, like, back up a little bit and not kind of play to the lowest common denominator in our party. I know the politics are there, but man, leadership has to step up and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to take one for now in the best interest of my province and my country, and I just don't think that letter did that.
I know Michaela wanted to get back in.
Yeah, I guess the issue that I see is, you know, there's this perception that Danielle Smith could create a national unity crisis or that Mark Carney could create a national unity crisis. I would argue that we're already there. And I think that the sentiment that we're seeing right now, people are at their wits' end between affordability, the perceived lack of access to Tidewater. Like we have so many issues in Canada that people are really, they're at the end of the rope with them and they want to see progress on that. And I think, you know, with Danielle Smith, you can say whatever you want about her, but she has done exactly what she said she was going to do. She is standing up to Ottawa in the best way that she knows how. I think she said in her closing debate statement, I'm thinking of debates now, but from last time, you know, however imperfect that may be. And I think at the end of the day, she was elected on a mandate to do that, and that's exactly what she's doing.
You know, I remember back a long way when Ralph Klein was providing all kinds of grief to Stephen Harper, can I just say? And they were, sort of in the same party. Kind of like how Doug Ford is sort of in the same party as Pierre Poilievre. But my point, Janet, being that that's been the book on Alberta-Ottawa relations since I can remember.
So I'm going to try and give a non-partisan, but more answer about strategy. Mark Carney should not have joked about Danielle Smith, because the whole selling point on Mark Carney was, I'm going to be the cool, steely guy who can handle Trump. If Danielle Smith is getting under his skin, it doesn't speak well to how well he's going to handle Trump. So that was a miscalculation on his part, because it showed that he does have a prickly side. So if I were Carney, I would, whatever you think of Danielle Smith, quit the Danielle Smith
And also,
jokes.
he wasn't going to be a politician. He also wasn't a politician.
He is now.
Yeah. Yeah. There's sort
He
of
is now.
evidence of that.
It's a steep learning curve, and he is now.
Yeah. But speak to what Michaela was saying. I mean, what do you see in your research when she talks about sort of the tensions that are there and the risk of sort of a unity crisis? Because at the same time, we're seeing evidence of Canadians being more united than they've ever been.
Sure.
Because of Trump.
So the questions we asked were about becoming the 51st state. Well, that's like a real extreme, right? So yes, very few people want to go to that extreme step. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of people in the middle who are feeling frustrated. And all the things Michaela talked about, affordability, the sense that our industries can't achieve their maximum potential, that efforts to diversify the economy have been stymied. So the fact that we don't want to join the United States doesn't mean that there's not some valid, a valid sense that of being disconnected from the rest of Canada. And I am going to stick my neck out and predict that we're going to see a different color map here in the West than we see in the East come election night. And there's a reason for that, because there is a sense of alienation, and it doesn't necessarily, for most people, turn into separation, but it does turn into a desire for a better deal.
Are the issues just about energy? Because I think some people could observe, listening to Danielle Smith, that's the only issue. I mean, issues around it, but you know what I'm saying, whether it's climate action or pipelines and carbon taxes, but there are other industries and other interests, like agriculture, for example, and you don't really hear her talking, say, about that very much.
I don't really hear anyone talking about agriculture.
No, I agree.
And that's the sad thing.
But she's the premier. That's all I'm saying is, like, are we getting enough sort of a mix of issues being paid attention to?
I totally agree. I actually completely agree with you, Kathleen. I think there needs to be more emphasis on agriculture. And I think, agriculture is Alberta's second largest industry, and there's many people in the audience here who work in the agriculture industry, who have roots in the agriculture industry. It powers this region, and I think it's a mistake on anyone to not pay attention to that industry, in the sense, farmers and ranchers and producers, growers, they work so hard. And I think it's an industry that's painfully humble. They won't get out there and throw all their money at lobbyists to get their message out there. But at the end of the day, they have really real frustrations. And I think you see dangers with canola tariffs from China. You see issues with getting cattle across the border. There's so many interprovincial trade barriers, even in agriculture, that I think that those issues often get ignored, and they shouldn't. They definitely need a voice, and I think the federal government needs to pay more attention to that.
And Barry, you live in Brooks. I wonder about issues like, I mean, you'd be interested in issues surrounding ag and the production of beef, as well as things like oil. But immigration would be and that's been something that's been discussed at length, as immigration has been pulled back on because we were seen as letting too many in, and that exacerbating an already existing affordability crisis and housing and so forth. So just give me the perspective from Brooks.
Well, obviously, Brooks, where would we be without it? I mean, JBS wouldn't be there. That's over $1 billion of GDP to the province, 3,000 workers. a million cattle a year. Like, it's a significant economic driver. And the fact is that you needed people to work in the plant to do it, and 85, 90% of them are new Canadians or recent Canadians or immigrants, right? And just to point out, that's not the only area. If you look at long-term, if you look at care homes, senior care, all kinds of maintenance, we would not be able to function. We would literally be behind further in a lot of areas without them. My wife was in the hospital on the weekend in Medicine Hat, and I didn't see anybody in the hallway that wasn't a person of color doing maintenance work, doing cleaning, doing all those kinds of things. So it's not just that. The problem has become is that we take this political approach to immigration issues too. It wasn't very long ago, Jason Kenney was getting rid of temporary foreign workers because of some story at a McDonald's in Ontario that was maybe half true or half not true, and he whacked that program. Had no idea how that would affect my city, had no idea how it would affect the livelihood of people who are trying to establish a life here. So we need a good, robust plan. And the other thing we do need to do is we need, again, our leadership to step up. And when immigrants get blamed for everything by certain groups of people, they need to stand up and tell people it's not true, because it isn't. I don't discount that there are bad apples in the people that get here, and maybe some things aren't working as well, but we need to fix that. But our leadership also has to stand up. We need to grow. Our economy would be dead without immigration in a proper, robust way, and our leaders need to stand up for those people that are taking huge risks. And I could sit here for 2 hours and tell you amazing stories about how people got here.
You could, but you won't.
I won't. but our leadership needs to stand up for them, and I think that's part of that changing the idea of how we go into that process. It's necessary, so let's have a good plan, and let's stand up for what's right.
Jenna, what are the issues that really drive Albertans in terms of what to prioritize? When we're in the middle of an election campaign, so are they like anyone else in terms of how they determine what their ballot box question is?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you just ask Albertans the question, what's the most important issue on your mind, they're going to ream off a list that looks very similar to other Canadians. But it just spins differently here. It spins differently depending on how you make your living and how old you are and on all those sorts of things, what gender you are. But yeah, so now we keep talking about Trump and the U.S. and stuff, but before Trump became a factor, what Albertans and other Canadians were very focused on was affordability. And, and that's still a big concern to people. And Trump has taken the focus off of that. But, you talk about the alienation and that sort of thing. It's because there's people out there who genuinely are finding it hard to feel like they're being we're this very rich province, but there's people who feel like they can't keep up. They're being left behind. And, Barry talked about politicizing everything. Well, when you politicize everything, sometimes you just dumb it down, right? So immigration, it just becomes a conversation of more versus less. Well, the average person's smart enough to know it's not more versus less. It's the right kind of immigration, right? It's providing new Canadians with the right kind of supports. And so, but you get into an election. I'm going to sound like Kim Campbell. You get into an election. It's not the time to talk about serious issues, and then everybody's going to end this election feeling very frustrated that we didn't have the level of conversation that we all know these issues need.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, and this will just be for the two of you, and Barry, I'll start with you. It's what I said to Rochelle at the end of the interview. If the next Prime Minister happened to be here, whoever that might happen to be, what would you say to him? I know it's going to be a him, so
that's what
would you say to him?
I would say to him that you need to be better. I think you need to be a better person. You need to be a better listener. You need to be a better facilitator. You need to be a better at considering what impacts that you decide have on every region of this country, including this one right here. One of the problems I would say to him is that, it's a vast country with a vastly different needs and wants and desires, vastly different resources and access to wealth. then you need to treat those regions like that. One size doesn't fit us all. Trust people at this level, local level in particular, of course that's my bias, to make decisions, give them the resources to make change in their communities that make a difference. Be open to that. There's lots of smart people in a room, so just be better at listening to them.
Okay, Michaela, to quote Pierre Poilievre, bring it home. You get to have the final word. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Well played. My answer isn't all that different from Barry's. I think, we need to get away, ironically, from soundbite politics. We need to start having politics in full sentences. We need to start really fleshing out these ideas, have real debates on policy. The next Prime Minister has a really tough task. 9 years, I think it's been, of the same government. You're going to have to bring people together. No matter who you are, you see the NDP, honestly, have fallen off the map. Time will tell if that actually ends that way with the debates for the next couple days. But Canada will be largely polarized. It'll be a largely two-party system with the exception of the Bloc in Quebec. And I think that the next Prime Minister has a Herculean task of bringing Canada together. Uniting against a common enemy in Donald Trump, not the United States. I think our American partners should still be our partners, but I don't think we need to trust the guy running the country for sure. So I think the next Prime Minister is a huge task. I would tell them to make sure they're listening, like Barry said, but at the end of the day, it's their job to be unifier, and I think their legacy will depend on whether they unified or divided the country.
Okay. Okay, get those hands ready one more time because I'm going to just thank everyone first of all. Janet Brown. She's looking out at the audience. Barry Morishita. And Michaela Fry. And of course, all of you, thank you. And so for our YouTube audience, you've been watching West of Centre live from Medicine Hat, and Medicine Hat was heard. You were heard. Thanks to our YouTube audience, and we're signing off on the live stream right now. Wow.